Larian Studios was on the edge. Week-to-week contracts, unpaid bills, and a dream that almost died more than once. And yet somehow, they clawed their way from near bankruptcy to delivering one of the most beloved RPGs of the modern era. But before Baldur's Gate 3 turned them into legends, there was Divinity Original Sin, the game that changed everything. In today's video, we're diving deep into Larian's chaotic road to success, the development story behind Divinity Original Sin, and answering one big question. In 2025, is it still worth playing? Spoiler alert, it's a hell of a ride. Before we start the video, a quick question. Has this ever happened to you? You love the game, the story's great, the world is awesome, but then the grind kicks in. Hours and hours just to level up, or that one boss you just can't beat. And eventually, you give up, even though deep down you really want to see what comes next. So yeah, Xmod is the solution if you're tired of wasting hours just to enjoy your game. It's a platform that supports over 5,000 single-player games, and with it, you can apply mods and cheats with just one click. Want to skip the grind? Get unlimited gold? Health, mana, stamina, weapons, whatever it is, Xmod probably has it. And the best part? You don't need to know anything about modding. Just launch the game, click the mod you want, and that's it. Instant power-up. Everything's in one place. Trainers, cheats, cosmetic mods, visual upgrades, all neatly organized by game and just one click away. You don't have to worry about viruses or getting banned either. It's 100% safe to use with your Steam account and other platforms, as long as you stick to single-player games. And if anything goes wrong, there's live support ready to help you out. And it's even easier to install it. Click the link in the description or in the pinned comment and download Xmod for free. Then launch your game and activate the mod you want. And boom, in 2 clicks, you're playing the way you want to play. Seriously, just by downloading it through my link, you're already helping the channel a lot, even if you're just testing it out. So give it a shot, it's free, and you'll be surprised by how many games, cool features, and awesome mods it already supports. Try it out and let me know in the comments how it went. Larian Studios didn't start out as the powerhouse we know today. Back in 1996, when Sven Vincke founded the studio, it was barely hanging on. Most of the team worked under weekly contracts, not knowing if they'd still have jobs by the next weekend. Every Friday felt like a coin toss. And when things got really bad, Vincke even used his own money to cover wages, once to the point where he couldn't afford gas to get home. At the time, Larian was juggling 2 very different projects. One was a fantasy RPG called The Lady, the Mage, and the Knight, which featured 3 playable characters. The other was Lead Wars, a real-time strategy game inspired by Command and Conquer. Only Lead Wars made it out the door, and even then it was rushed, built in just 5 months and released in 1997. As for the RPG, it was scrapped entirely. Desperate to keep the lights on, Larian started making educational software. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Those gigs helped bring in some much-needed cash while they figured out what to do next. In 2002, they finally got another shot at the RPG world with a game called Divinity. It was built on some of the ideas from their canceled project and mixed action-heavy combat with a few RPG systems. Larian pitched it as a mix of Baldur's Gate and Diablo, but in practice it leaned way more toward Diablo, and that wasn't by accident. At the time, publishers were obsessed with Diablo-style games, and Larian made it clear they were trying to ride that wave just to stay relevant. Divinity turned out better than expected. Critics liked it, and players enjoyed it. But here's the kicker. Larian barely saw a dime. The publisher walked away with most of the profit, leaving the studio broke yet again, even after releasing a successful game. The story in Divinity was pitched as a major selling point, but in reality, it was thrown together in just a few days. Most people showed up for the combat, the hack-and-slash, dungeon-crawling style that felt more like Diablo than a deep narrative-driven RPG. It worked well enough to get attention, but not nearly well enough to secure the studio's financial future. After that experience, Sven Vincke had enough. If they were going to go down, at least they'd go down swinging. Larian decided to try self-publishing, but they still had to partner with distributors for the next game. That's when they finally realized Divinity had performed way better than they thought. Distributors were lining up to work with them. But instead of building on that momentum the right way, they rushed out a sequel. Beyond Divinity hit the market too fast and too messy. Tons of bugs, incomplete quests, and cut content made it feel like a step back. It was clear the game was made to keep the studio alive, not to push the series forward. And honestly, it showed. After the rushed launch of Beyond Divinity, Larian knew they couldn't survive just cranking out half-baked sequels. The market was shifting fast, and by the early 2000s, 3D RPGs were becoming the new standard, and staying in 2D meant becoming obsolete. So Larian took the leap into full 3D with a game called Divinity 2 Ego Draconis. On paper, it was bold. Not only were they building a massive open world, they also wanted players to transform into a dragon and fly around that world at will. That one feature alone added layers of complexity most small studios wouldn't even dare to touch. But Larian went for it anyway. When the game dropped on PC and Xbox 360, things fell apart. Divinity 2 was rough. It launched with bugs, performance issues, and a world that often felt empty or broken. The vision was there, but the execution couldn't keep up. Critics hammered it, fans were disappointed, and sales didn't come close to expectations. To make matters worse, the studio had taken on serious debt to finish the project. They were betting on Divinity 2 to be the turning point. Instead, it nearly crushed them. With revenue falling short, Larian had to go back to doing contract work just to survive. Educational games, corporate software, anything that would keep the lights on while they regrouped. After the disaster that was Divinity 2's launch, Sven Vinke realized they couldn't keep disappointing the people who actually cared, their fans. Larian's reputation was starting to slip. Broken releases, cut features, and rushed endings were becoming the norm. So instead of jumping straight into a new game, they made a bold move. They went back and fixed the mess. In 2011, they dropped Divinity 2: The Dragon Knight Saga. It was essentially a cleaned-up version of the original game bundled with its expansion. More stable, more polished, and finally playable the way it was meant to be. Critics gave it a second chance. Fans started to forgive. It didn't make Larian rich, but it bought them something even more valuable: time and trust. That experience lit a fire under Vinke. The old cycle of big ideas and broken launches had to end. Larian had always dreamed big, but their games kept getting gutted by budget limits or publisher demands. Every time they reached for something more, they got dragged back down. So they decided to stop depending on publishers altogether. From that point on, Larian made a promise to themselves: no more shipping games that weren't ready. Of course, no RPG that size is going to launch completely bug-free, but the goal was simple. When players picked up a new Larian title, the first thing they'd talk about wouldn't be the bugs, it would be the game itself. With that new mindset, they kicked off two new projects. One was a spin-off built around the dragon-flying tech from Divinity 2, eventually called Divinity Dragon Commander. The other was something far more ambitious, a classic, party-based RPG that would go on to become Divinity Original Sin. At first, Divinity Original Sin wasn't meant to be Larian's big break. It was supposed to be the side hustle. A smaller, cheaper project designed to hit digital storefronts quickly, make a bit of money, and help pay the bills while they focused on their real game, Divinity Dragon Commander. Back then, Original Sin didn't even have its final name. Internally, they called it Eyes of the Child, and it was going to be a short Xbox arcade release with real-time combat and a bizarre premise about a kidnapped child whose paintings came to life. But the further they got into development, the more things started to shift. The team realized they weren't just building filler content. They were sitting on something that had real potential. The systems they were prototyping were deeper than expected, and for the first time in years, it actually felt like they were creating something with heart. So priorities flipped. Dragon Commander, the game that was supposed to lead the charge, was pushed aside so they could go all in on this RPG. The story changed, the tone changed, and the entire scale of the project exploded. That weird little side project about a magical kid turned into a full-blown epic fantasy adventure. But ambition isn't cheap. Larian had made the decision to self-publish, which meant every new feature, every rewrite, and every delay came straight out of their own pocket. And with the scope of Original Sin growing by the week, they were running out of time and money fast. By the time Larian launched their Kickstarter campaign for Divinity Original Sin, most of the heavy lifting had already been done. The game was well into development, and they weren't looking to start the project, they were trying to finish it. Before turning to crowdfunding, Larian had already pulled just about every financial lever they could. They brought in private investors using a setup called an SPV, or Special Purpose Vehicle. Basically, they created a separate company that held the rights to just that one game. Investors owned 49% of the SPV, and Larian held the rest, keeping the core Divinity franchise safe for future use. On top of that, they took out bank loans. But by then, most Belgian banks weren't exactly thrilled about lending to a small game studio with a spotty financial history. So Larian got, how can I put this, creative. They started delaying the payment of certain taxes, including VAT, from their sales, essentially using the Belgian government as an unofficial loan source. It was a desperate move, and it didn't go unnoticed. Eventually, they got blacklisted. That kind of financial pressure can crush a studio, as tax agencies don't negotiate like banks. When they want their money, they don't wait. If Larian hadn't found a way to finish Original Sin quickly, that could have been the end. To keep the momentum going during the final stretch, Larian made another smart move. They dropped Divinity Original Sin into Steam's Early Access. At the time, Early Access was still a relatively new concept, but it turned out to be a game changer. Not only did it help raise extra cash, it also gave the studio a direct line to the players. Feedback came in fast, bugs got squashed before launch. And most importantly, a real sense of community started forming around the game. Meanwhile, their Kickstarter campaign, launched when the game was already deep in development, set a modest goal of $400,000. But fans showed up in a big way, pushing it just shy of the 1 million mark. That extra funding allowed Larian to expand the world, polish mechanics, and deliver a much more complete experience. When Original Sin finally launched, it blew past expectations. Critics praised the game for its depth and creativity. Players loved the tactical combat and freedom of choice. It was the kind of success Larian had been chasing for years. And this time, with no publisher taking a massive cut, the money actually went back into the studio. One fun side note, Sven Vincke later revealed that traditional online advertising did almost nothing for them. They spent around $20,000 on big ad placements across popular gaming sites. All that money translated into just 6,000 clicks. It was a brutal reminder that no amount of flashy banners can sell a game better than actual word of mouth and a passionate player base. A little over a year after the original release, Larian launched the enhanced edition of Divinity Original Sin. And it didn't just clean up mechanics and visuals, it also reworked the game's pacing and balance. Late-game difficulty got a bump. Item stats were rebalanced across the board, and the overall economy felt tighter and more rewarding. Small touches, like improved companion banter and subtle story tweaks, gave the narrative a bit more weight. They even added a short but heartfelt epilogue, giving players a proper send-off with their party after the final battle. If you're on PC, the original version is still available. But honestly, there's no reason to go back. The Enhanced Edition is the definitive way to play. It runs better, plays better, and just feels more complete. That said, it's not perfect. Even years later, the game still has a few rough edges. One common annoyance is how combat can occasionally freeze during enemy turns, like the AI's stuck overthinking its next move. It usually corrects itself, but it breaks the flow just enough to be noticeable. Still, considering how deep and flexible the combat system is, these hiccups don't drag things down much. They're more like tiny bumps in a ride that's still absolutely worth taking. Visually, Divinity Original Sin doesn't just look good for its time, it still holds up today. One of the game's boldest moves was ditching the fixed isometric camera that most CRPGs clung to back then. Instead, Larian gave players full 3D control, which not only made the world feel more immersive, but also gave the game a fresh identity in a genre stuck in old habits. The color palette plays a huge role too. Most classic CRPGs went for that muted, gritty look like gray stones, brown armor, and dark dungeons. But Original Sin throws that out the window. It's vibrant, lush, and full of energy. Whether you're in a sunlit forest or a glowing magical cave, the world feels alive and visually distinct from its peers. Enemy design takes that same philosophy and cranks it up. The orcs are massive and bright green, almost cartoonish in a way that feels deliberate and fun. Elementals like fire and ice creatures don't just look cool, they interact beautifully with the lighting of each area, making battles feel dramatic and dynamic. Bosses and special enemies are equally memorable. They're not just tougher, they look like they matter. The soundtrack pulls its weight too. The battle theme hits hard, giving fights an extra dose of intensity, and exploration tracks blend perfectly into the atmosphere of each location. There are occasional hiccups where the music cuts out unexpectedly, which breaks the immersion a bit, but those moments are rare. When it's working right, the music elevates the entire experience. And let's not forget the voice acting. With the enhanced edition, Larian added full voiceover to every single line of dialogue, and it paid off. The performances give real personality to the characters and make the world feel more grounded. It's one of those upgrades that makes it tough to even think about going back to the original release. The story in Divinity Original Sin starts small, but quickly spirals into something way bigger. You take control of two source hunters, custom characters you create from scratch, who arrive in a quiet coastal town to investigate a mysterious murder. But right from the start, things are clearly not normal. Orcs are storming the beaches, undead are crawling out of graves, and strange magical forces are warping the world around you. At first, it feels like a collection of disconnected problems, but as you dig deeper, those threads start to twist together. You uncover a secret cult, realize time itself is fractured, and suddenly, you're not just solving a murder, you're trying to stop a cosmic disaster. The pacing is tight, with the story constantly evolving based on the clues you uncover, the people you talk to, and how you choose to piece it all together. What makes the narrative stand out is how hands-off it is. There are no map markers guiding you from one objective to the next. You have to actually read notes, pay attention to dialogue, and think through what you're doing. It leans hard into that old-school CRPG feel, where exploration and curiosity are rewarded. Quests are packed with clever design. Some can be resolved through combat, others through dialogue, or even by using random items you didn't think mattered. One moment you're solving a murder mystery, and the next, you're teleporting behind a building to avoid a deadly fight or talking your way out of a siege. It's unpredictable, in the best way. The morality in the game is pretty straightforward. Unlike something like Pillars of Eternity, where every side has shades of gray, Divinity paints a clearer picture of good versus evil. You'll run into characters who are obviously doing harm, and you're usually the force pushing back. That simplicity actually works here, especially when combined with the humor Larian weaves into the dialogue. There's a sarcastic tone running through a lot of conversations, and it gives the game a playful edge without taking away from the stakes. A cool system adds even more flavor. Your two main characters can disagree in dialogue, debating the outcomes of key choices. It's subtle but adds personality to the pair and can be especially fun in co-op, where each player controls one of them. You'll often have moments where your characters argue, reflect on past actions, or challenge each other's morals. The companion characters you can recruit during your journey aren't as deeply written as the villains or major NPCs, but the world more than makes up for it. The cast of characters you meet is bizarre, funny, threatening, and full of charm. Every corner of the map has someone worth talking to, and almost every situation feels like it could go in a dozen directions depending on how you approach it. Now we've arrived at the real star of the show, the combat. Divinity Original Sin is turn-based, tactical, and deeply satisfying once it all clicks. It uses an action point system, which means every move, spell, or attack costs a certain number of points. You start your turn with a fixed pool of points, and how you spend them is completely up to you. Moving, casting, attacking, it's all drawn from the same resource. So you're constantly weighing your options. Should you spend 2 points to reposition, or save them for a big attack next turn? That kind of micro-decision-making gives the battles real tension and strategy. Normally, action point systems can feel limiting or clunky, especially if you're used to setups with separate movement and attack phases. But here, it works because of how balanced the whole thing is. Melee characters have to get up close, which costs more points, but they apply pressure and control when they reach their target. Ranged fighters can hit from safety, but many of their powerful skills cost more and come with cooldowns, so there's always a trade-off. The real star of the combat, though, is the environmental interaction. This is where Larian sets itself apart. You're not just trading hits, you're shaping the battlefield. Cast rain to extinguish fire or create puddles. Zap those puddles with lightning to stun enemies. Freeze a blood-covered area, and trap enemies in ice or blow up poison clouds with a fireball. You're constantly chaining elements together, creating chaos in the best way. And as the game progresses, you gain access to even more area control spells and crowd control tools like freeze, knockdown, and stun, which really elevate the pacing and rhythm of each fight. There's also a layer of unpredictability that keeps you on your toes, like missed chances, critical hits, limited use abilities. All of it makes every battle feel dynamic. And as you get deeper into the game, with better gear and more advanced spells, you start to feel unstoppable, not because the game gets easier, but because you've mastered its systems. Outside of combat, Divinity Original Sin turns into a playground of exploration and experimentation. It sticks to that classic CRPG style where you're clicking around, rotating the camera, checking every corner for secrets, and examining every corpse for clues or loot. There are no glowing markers telling you where to go. You have to pay attention, read journals, talk to NPCs, and piece things together yourself. Side quests are everywhere, and they're often buried under layers of dialogue, hidden notes, or environmental puzzles. Books and letters you find along the way can unlock entirely new objectives or give you critical info for quests you didn't even know you had. The quest journal updates dynamically as you discover things, but it still expects you to do the thinking. Elemental interaction plays a huge role even outside of battle. You'll come across traps, toxic gas, pools of fire, blocked passages, and all kinds of hazards. And the game rarely tells you how to deal with them. Maybe you teleport past them, maybe you freeze the lava, or maybe you use a barrel you found 2 hours ago in a totally different zone. The design constantly pushes you to experiment, and it's incredibly satisfying when your creativity pays off. The world is broken into large, self-contained zones, each one part of a different act. If you've played Baldur's Gate 3, you'll recognize the structure. Act 1 has its own full map, filled with caves, dungeons, and towns. Act 2 and 3 shift you into completely new regions with their own tone and challenges. The good news is you can backtrack between areas when the story allows it, which is perfect because some quests stretch across the whole game and only resolve much later. And fast travel makes all of this way more manageable. As soon as you discover a waypoint, you can teleport to it from anywhere. No need to run across the entire map just to turn in a quest or revisit a merchant. Speaking of merchants, almost every NPC in the game is open for trade. Even if they don't have anything useful, there's always a chance they're holding that one scroll or item you need. Character creation in Divinity Original Sin starts with a unique twist. You build not just one, but 2 protagonists right out of the gate. They're always human in this first game, with no other races to pick from, but the customization options are still solid. You get to choose from 12 starting classes, which mostly determine your opening skills and attributes. After that, the build is fully open. You can tweak your stats, shift your role, and grow your characters however you want. There's no resting system or limited spell slots like in traditional Dungeons & Dragons games. Every fight lets you go all out from the beginning. Your strongest spells and best skills are always on the table, only gated by cooldowns and your available action points. That makes combat feel consistently intense. No saving your good stuff for later. Stats follow the familiar format: strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, perception, and speed. On top of that, you invest in combat and magic skills like two-handed weapons, single-handed, archery, fire spells, ice spells, and more. The more you level up a skill, the more powerful and varied your options become. Learning new abilities is tied to spellbooks and scrolls you find throughout the world, but you can only learn them if you've trained enough in the related skill tree. That creates a natural incentive to specialize without ever locking you into one path too early. Then there are talents, passive perks you pick every few levels. These range from practical bonuses like doubling your carry weight, to combat modifiers like bonus damage against knocked down enemies, or quirky trade-offs like gaining charisma at the cost of strength. Inventory management is pretty chill. Items have weight, and your strength stat determines how much you can carry, but it rarely becomes an issue. You can always teleport excess gear straight to your homestead stash, which keeps your inventory clear without forcing you to micromanage constantly. There's also a basic crafting system that lets you cook, brew potions, and repair weapons. Durability exists, but it's rarely punishing. It adds a touch of realism without becoming an annoying chore. Overall, the systems are deep enough to support hardcore builds, but never so complicated that they drag down the pace. It's flexible, accessible, and constantly rewarding as you shape your characters into exactly who you want them to be. Now let's talk about the rougher edges, because yeah, Divinity Original Sin has a few. One of the biggest letdowns is the way companion characters are handled. They do their job in combat, and you can customize their builds, but when it comes to the story, they're basically just along for the ride. Most of the conversations and key decisions are dominated by your two main characters, while the companions just kind of stand there silently, like extras in a play who forgot their lines. They rarely chime in, even during major plot moments. There's no relationship system, no approval mechanics, no meaningful banter where they challenge your decisions or offer emotional insight. It makes them feel flat, which is disappointing considering how alive the rest of the world feels. At a time when other RPGs were nailing dynamic party interactions, this part of the experience feels stuck in the past. There's also the issue of some side quests being a little too obscure for their own good. Don't get me wrong, many of them are clever, layered, and rewarding. But every now and then, the game expects you to make a leap in logic that just isn't reasonable without a guide. For new players especially, a few of these quests can feel more like a trap than a puzzle. If you're someone who hates using walkthroughs, just be ready to do a lot of note-taking and trial and error. And then there's the user interface, specifically the toolbar during combat. It's shockingly easy to accidentally drag an ability or item off the bar instead of using it. You go to click on Fireball mid-fight, and suddenly it's not casting, it's being removed from your setup. There's no lock feature, so it's super easy to mess things up in the heat of battle. It's a small detail, but one that becomes a recurring annoyance over a long playthrough. Divinity Original Sin turned out to be even better than I expected. It's one of those rare RPGs that manages to be deeply strategic and endlessly creative without ever slowing down the pace. There are countless ways to approach situations, some clever, some completely unexpected, and the game gives you full freedom to experiment. But what's really impressive is how it never lets that freedom get in the way of momentum. Progress is constant. The world keeps moving, and if you want to go all in without ever stopping to rest, the game fully supports that. Even as someone who usually loves traditional rest systems in RPGs, I found the non-stop flow here incredibly refreshing. You're always discovering something, leveling up, unlocking new gear, or pulling off ridiculous combos in combat. I did miss a bit more depth in the party dynamics, but the main narrative stays focused and hits the mark with confidence. At the end of the day, Divinity Original Sin isn't just one of the best CRPGs ever made. It might be the one that nails the fun factor better than any other. And considering this game often drops to around $8 during sales, it's honestly a steal. For everything it offers, that price makes it an easy recommendation. And hey, don't forget to download Xmod. It seriously helps the channel keep going and lets me bring even more content your way. Also, drop a comment, hit that like button, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you being here.